My mother left me when I was 4 months old and returned 30 years later when she heard about my success. I was only 4 months old when my mother decided that I wasn't enough. She left me behind like I was nothing more than a forgotten toy, left to gather dust in a corner. I don't remember the day, of course, but my heart has always known it was the beginning of something I could never quite shake off. I was raised by my father, who did his best, but the weight of not having her around was something that never truly went away. There was always a hole where she should have been, one that my father tried to fill with love, but no matter how hard he tried, it wasn't the same. There were nights I would sit in my room, staring at the old pictures of her, wondering where she was and why she couldn't be here with me. My father's grief, though he tried to hide it, was evident in his every gesture. He was heartbroken in ways that were hard to express to a child, and I could see the weight of his own abandonment. As I grew, I learned to live without her, to adapt to the absence of the woman who should have been my guiding star. Birthdays came and went, and each one felt like a silent reminder of the mother I never really knew. I didn't resent my father, how could I? He did everything he could, but there was a part of me that always wondered if I had done something wrong. If maybe I had cried too much or been too loud. I would never know the truth behind her leaving. She never gave me the chance to ask. Time passed, and I made my way through life, scarred but resilient. I worked hard, focused on my education, and built the kind of future my parents would have wanted for me. But even in my adult years, the absence of her lingered in subtle ways. Relationships were always a bit harder to build, and I found myself wondering if I was forever cursed to never truly understand the meaning of unconditional love. It wasn't until I hit my 30s that things started to change. I had done well for myself, really well. The business I had built from the ground up had finally paid off, and the wealth I'd accumulated was substantial. It wasn't just money, it was the sense of achievement that made me feel like I had finally arrived at some version of success I had once only dreamed of. And then, she came back. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, an invitation from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, though, even after all these years. My mother. She was back. I know this must come as a shock, she said, her voice shaky. But I've been following your journey. I wanted to reach out. I was hoping we could meet. My heart felt like it stopped in my chest. I couldn't decide if I was angry, hurt, or confused. After all these years of living without her, without any word or sign, why now? Why after so long? And why did it feel like there was something she wasn't saying? I hesitated. My thoughts were jumbled, my emotions all over the place. Why now, was all I managed to get out. I've heard about your success. I just wanted to see you again, to see how you're doing. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. My success, my wealth, it had finally gotten her attention. It was clear now. She wasn't coming back because she missed me or because she regretted leaving. No, she was back because I had something she wanted to be part of. I agreed to meet her, but the feeling was strange, unnerving. I wasn't sure what to expect, or if I was even prepared for the moment when we would sit face to face. The child in me had dreamed of this day, but the adult, the one who had lived all these years without her, was afraid of what it might mean. And so, when we met, I saw the woman who had abandoned me, and yet, I saw something more. She looked older, a little worn by time, but there was an air about her, something that made it clear she had a new agenda. Her words were hesitant at first. She spoke about regret, about how hard life had been for her, how much she had suffered during those years apart. But as she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a sense of disconnection. It was like she was reading from a script, rehearsed for years, waiting for this moment. I never meant to hurt you, she said softly, eyes glistening with what seemed like genuine emotion. But I couldn't feel the sincerity. There was something missing, something I had hoped would be there, but wasn't. The conversation drifted, and she steered it toward my success. She mentioned how proud she was of me, how proud she was that I had turned out so well despite everything. And then, as if it were just a passing thought, she added, I've been thinking. I could use a little help. I've had some financial difficulties. I thought maybe you could lend a hand. The words hit me like a slap, even though I wasn't surprised. There it was. The reason she had reached out. My wealth was no longer just a success to be proud of. It was an opportunity. For a moment, I was speechless. The anger and the sadness mixed into a tidal wave of emotion. How could she come back after all these years, after abandoning me when I needed her most, and now ask for something in return? It felt like a betrayal all over again. But she was my mother, and despite everything, I could hear her vulnerability in her voice, and it made me hesitate. Could I turn my back on her completely? Could I walk away from this moment and never look back? I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't going to be the reunion I had always dreamed of. It was an agonizing few days after our meeting, full of sleepless nights and endless questions swirling in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't quite figure out what. The idea of helping my mother, the woman who had abandoned me, was foreign to me, and yet the part of me that still longed for her approval was conflicted. My life had been built without her, brick by brick, and yet, here she was, demanding to be part of the life I had created. She spoke of hardship, of regret, but there was no real apology, no acknowledgement of the years I had spent growing up without her. The words she spoke didn't feel like the reunion I had fantasized about as a child. They felt like an attempt to reconnect on her terms, not mine. I spent the next few days replaying that meeting over and over again in my head. It wasn't the guilt that weighed on me, it was the anger, the sense of betrayal. I had built everything on my own. I didn't owe her anything. But then, I'd never truly gotten closure, had I? I found myself pacing in the quiet of my apartment, staring out the window at the city below. The skyline had always been a symbol of my success, something I had fought for and earned. And now, my past had come knocking, threatening to tear down the very walls I had built. I couldn't let her back in. Not like this. But I couldn't just shut the door on her either. After all, she was my mother, wasn't she? I tried to tell myself that this was just another chapter in my life, a chapter that was long overdue. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I didn't know how to handle this part of my life, and I wasn't sure I ever would. The phone rang. It was her again. I knew it without even looking at the caller ID. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling my heart race. Should I pick up? Should I tell her everything I had been bottling up since that meeting? My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally answered, my voice steady but cold. Hello. She sounded different this time, more desperate, like she had prepared herself for what was coming. I know you're angry, she began, her voice low and careful, as if choosing each word like a fragile object. I don't blame you for that. I just want a chance to make things right. Please, don't shut me out again. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same ache I had carried all my life. A part of me wanted to forgive her, wanted to believe that she was sincere. But the other part, the part that had fought so hard to survive without her, couldn't forget how she had disappeared without a trace all those years ago. Make things right? I echoed, the words tasting bitter. You left. You abandoned me without any explanation. You didn't even look back. How am I supposed to just forget that? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. I was afraid, she said quietly. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I wasn't strong enough to handle it. I thought I was doing the best thing by leaving, but I was wrong. I was weak, and I made a terrible mistake. I know that now. The words were hollow. They didn't feel like an apology. They didn't feel like they were meant for me. They felt rehearsed, like something she had said 1,000 times in her mind but never had the courage to say out loud until now. I don't know what you want from me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You can't just waltz back into my life and expect me to forgive you. 30 years, Mom. 30 years of questions, of growing up without you, and now you want something from me? There was another pause, longer this time. The silence between us stretched thin, like an old thread about to snap. I know I can't change the past, she said finally, her voice breaking. But I want to try. I don't care about your money, your success, I just want to be part of your life. Even if it's just a little. I know I don't deserve it, but please, give me a chance to prove that I can be a mother to you now. Her words hit me harder than I expected. They stirred something deep inside me that I had buried a long time ago. The yearning, the longing for a mother who had never been there, resurfaced with a sharpness that made it hard to breathe. But this wasn't just about what she wanted. It was about what I needed. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let her back in, not like this, not without something more. You want to prove you can be a mother to me? I asked, my voice firm. Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Show me that you understand what you've taken from me. Show me that you're willing to work for my forgiveness. She was silent for a moment, as if my words had hit harder than she expected. Then, finally, she said, I will. I'll do whatever it takes. I ended the call not knowing how I felt. She wanted a chance, but I had no idea what kind of chance I was willing to give her. The old wounds were still there, festering beneath the surface. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her, but I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living in this limbo between the past and the present. As I sat in the silence of my apartment, the weight of her words hung heavy in the air. This was the beginning of something that would either heal me or destroy me. I just didn't know which it would be yet. It's strange how time works. One moment, you're on the precipice of something monumental, and the next, you're back in the whirlwind of emotions you thought you had buried. After the call with my mother, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. I thought that by setting the terms, I could protect myself, but the truth was that I had no idea what I was getting into. I spent the next few weeks in a daze, trying to navigate my own feelings while still keeping my life together. The business was thriving, the money was flowing, and everything in my world seemed to be exactly as it should be. Yet there was this new, uninvited presence. My mother's return to my life had altered the rhythm, and I couldn't find my footing again. I avoided her for a while, telling myself I needed time to process. I didn't know what it was that she wanted from me, but I knew that whatever it was, it would come at a cost. I had never truly understood the concept of forgiveness, not when it came to her. How could I forgive someone who had abandoned me at my most vulnerable? How could I let her back into my life without feeling like I was sacrificing something I couldn't get back? I started to dread the phone calls and the text messages. Each one felt like another piece of my control slipping away. She would send messages like, "I'm thinking of you today. I hope you're doing well," and I would just stare at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Her messages were polite in the way a stranger might be kind to you after a brief encounter. It wasn't enough. But then again, what would be enough? Finally, one day, I gave in. I agreed to meet her again. We met at a small cafe in the city, quiet, almost intimate. I arrived early, wanting to control the situation, to prepare myself for whatever conversation would unfold. I sat at a corner table, watching the door with a sense of foreboding. When she arrived, she looked exactly the same as before, older, yes, but the same familiar features, the same eyes that I had spent years dreaming of looking into again. She didn't sit right away. She hovered for a second, unsure if this was real. But when she finally sat down across from me, there was no immediate warmth, no rush of emotions as I had imagined in my fantasies. It felt awkward, strained, like two strangers forced to pretend they shared a history. "How are you?" she asked, her voice tentative. "I'm fine," I answered quickly. "You?" "I'm doing okay. Life's been complicated." She trailed off, looking for the right words. But I knew what she meant. She wasn't struggling with life, she was struggling with her decision to leave me behind. She didn't know how to bridge the gap she had created. "Is that all you came to say? That life's been complicated?" I couldn't help myself. The bitterness, the anger that I'd buried for so long, crept into my voice. "I came to tell you that I'm sorry," she said, meeting my gaze. Her eyes were filled with a sincerity I hadn't expected. "Sorry?" I repeated. I hadn't heard the word in so long, it almost felt foreign. "You're sorry? For what? For disappearing when I needed you most? For leaving me to grow up in a world where I had to figure everything out alone? That kind of sorry? Or are you sorry because I'm rich now, and you need something from me?" Her face flushed, and for the first time, I saw her as vulnerable, truly vulnerable. "I'm sorry for everything. For leaving you, for not being the mother you deserved. I know I can't change the past, but I want to try and make things right now. Please, let me do that." Her words hung in the air between us, thick with the weight of years gone by. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to throw the years of hurt and pain at her and make her understand the scars she had left on me. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the tension of our shared silence. "I don't know what you expect from me," I said after a long pause. "You left me. And I built my life without you. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how much work it took to become who I am?" "I do," she replied, her voice softer now. "And I know that I have no right to ask for anything, especially not your forgiveness. I just want a chance to show you that I can be there for you now. Not because of your money, but because I'm your mother, and I want to be part of your life, in whatever way you can allow. I sat back, taking a deep breath. The woman in front of me wasn't the same woman who had walked away. She was older, more aware, but there was something else I could see now. A hint of desperation. She had lost so much time, and now that I had everything she had once dreamed of, success, wealth, stability, she wanted a piece of it. Not out of greed, I realized, but out of a need to make up for everything she had lost. I don't know if I can just let you in, I said slowly. You can't just waltz back into my life because I'm doing well. You don't get to come back after all these years and expect everything to be fine. I understand, she whispered. And I won't ask for more than you're willing to give. The conversation continued, but the sting of her words lingered. I knew I couldn't forgive her completely, not yet, not after all that had happened. But I couldn't close the door entirely either. Something inside me, a part one didn't know existed, still wanted to try. I still wanted to believe that this could somehow be repaired. But the truth was, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to forgive her, to open my heart up to someone who had already shattered it once. I wasn't ready to let her back into my life, no matter how many apologies she gave or how many promises she made. The trust that had been broken so long ago wasn't something that could be mended with a few kind words. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I think we've said enough for today, I said, my voice firm. I need time to think about this. She nodded, her face pale but resigned. I understand. I'll wait, for as long as you need. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt like I was walking away from a piece of myself, a piece I wasn't sure I could reclaim. The weight of her apology sat heavily on my shoulders, and I couldn't tell if it was a burden or the first step towards something that might, one day, resemble healing. But the journey to forgiveness wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure it would be worth it. I had worked too hard for what I had, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, take it away from me. The weeks after that meeting felt like I was living in a haze, struggling to see clearly, struggling to figure out the path forward. My mother had reached out, trying to bridge the gap between us, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Was this really about reconciliation, or was it about what I could offer her now that I had wealth and success? I tried to keep myself distracted. The business needed me, and I threw myself into work, burying my thoughts under spreadsheets, meetings, and the pressure of deadlines. I didn't want to deal with the mess that had suddenly appeared in my life. But the truth is, no matter how much I avoided it, her presence, her absence, and the ghosts of my childhood lingered in the corners of my mind. One night, as I sat alone in my office, the weight of the day finally pressing on me, my phone buzzed with a message from her. I know I've asked a lot from you. I understand if you're not ready to move forward, but I hope you'll give me a chance. I'm not asking for everything, just for a little piece of you. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. A little piece of me. That's what she wanted. But was I willing to give it? I thought back to all the years I spent wondering about her, fantasizing about a reunion that would fill the empty spaces inside me. I had imagined it so many times, dreamed about the perfect moment when she would return, and we would heal the wounds together. But that fantasy wasn't real. The reality was far more complicated. She wasn't the mother I had longed for. She was a woman who had walked away and left me to grow up in the shadows of her absence. And now she was back, not with answers or explanations, but with an empty apology that still felt too little, too late. My heart told me to close the door, to never look back. But my mind told me that this was my chance, my one chance to heal, to let go of the past and move forward, not just for her, but for me. I couldn't make up my mind. So, I did what I had always done in moments of uncertainty, I buried it. I pushed it down, deep into the pit of my stomach, and kept moving forward. If I didn't address it, maybe it would go away. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. The past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you ran. Then, out of nowhere, the next bombshell dropped. I was at a charity event, sitting at the head table, speaking with potential investors when I heard someone call my name from behind. I turned, expecting one of the board members, but instead, I froze. There she was, my mother, standing at the back of the room. She looked out of place, like she didn't belong, and the world seemed to stop for a moment. I couldn't breathe. The shock of seeing her there, in this world I had built for myself, sent a wave of anger and confusion through me. Before I could react, she was already walking toward me. The room felt like it was closing in, and I wanted to disappear. I had no idea what she was doing here or how she had found out about this event, but it didn't matter. She was here, and nothing in my world felt stable anymore. "You're doing well, I see," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of the crowd on me. Everyone was watching this awkward encounter, their curiosity palpable. It felt like the moment I had always feared, the moment when I would have to face the woman who had abandoned me, not as a child, but as the person I had become. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. She looked around, her gaze shifting nervously. "I wanted to see you. I wanted to be part of your life. I thought, maybe, if I showed up here, it might be the right time. I don't know." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had known I would be here, surrounded by people, in the midst of something that wasn't just about me but about my business. She had come to this event, not out of a sense of remorse, but because she wanted to be in my world, even if it was just for a moment. She wanted to stake a claim in my life, just as I had always feared. "Mom, this isn't the way to do this," I said, shaking my head. "You can't just waltz into my life whenever you feel like it. You've been gone for 30 years. I've built everything on my own." Her eyes welled with tears, but this time, I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I know I don't have a right to ask for anything. But I need to be part of your life. I've missed so much." I stared at her, my emotions a mix of anger, resentment, and an ache I didn't know how to name. There was a part of me that still wanted to hold her, to forgive her, to tell her everything I had wanted to say all these years. But there was a bigger part of me that wanted to walk away, to leave her behind again, this time for good. "This isn't just about you anymore," I said, my voice breaking despite myself. "I've worked so hard to make something of myself, and I can't just let you back in like nothing happened. I can't." She nodded slowly, as if accepting that truth, but the hurt in her eyes didn't disappear. It was like she had given up, but at the same time, she hadn't. She was still holding on to the hope that, maybe one day, I would open my heart to her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything. I never expected you to forgive me. I thought maybe I could be here for you. In whatever way you'll allow." The pain in her voice was real. But it wasn't enough to erase the years of abandonment, the years I had spent alone, trying to heal without her. I wanted to forgive her. I wanted to give her the chance she asked for. But I couldn't just pretend the past didn't exist. I couldn't ignore the fact that she had been absent when I needed her most. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you," I said, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "But I'm not ready to let go of you either. Not yet." And with that, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a strange emptiness settle inside me. I wasn't sure what I had just done, or what it meant for us. But for the first time, I realized that forgiveness wasn't something she could earn overnight, it was something I had to give to myself first. As I stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd, I knew one thing for sure, this was only the beginning of a journey I hadn't been ready for. But it was a journey I had to take, whether I was ready or not. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.